and welcome back to my channel, or hi if you're new here. My name is Andrea and I am the face behind the crochet brand Cosmaudi. And today I want to talk to you about something that's super important when you are crocheting a garment, and that is blocking. So you might be familiar with this term, or you might have heard of it before but not really know what it is, or you might know what it is and just be too afraid to do it. So hopefully today's video will demystify some of the aspects of blocking and teach you why it's important and teach you how to do it at home with whatever materials you may have. So I first want to talk to you broadly about what blocking is, and I'll cover the specifics more as I actually block this piece. But basically, blocking is a finishing step that you do once you're done crocheting a piece, and there's a few different methods of blocking. So the most popular ones, at least that I am familiar with, are wet blocking and steam blocking. So wet blocking involves kind of dunking your piece in warm soapy water, letting it sit there for a few minutes, then gently squeezing the water out, rolling it up in a towel to further dry it, and then pinning it in place and letting your piece dry fully before taking it off the blocking mats. So that is wet blocking. Steam blocking is similar, but you don't really need to dunk your piece and let it sit in warm soapy water. You basically pin your piece already into the desired measurements that you want, and then you steam it with a steamer, I think those things are called, or you can use just kind of a regular iron and steam it like that. So different methods work better for different fabrics. I believe that steam blocking works best for fabrics that are synthetic because you are essentially melting the fibers a little bit. I know that you want to be careful when you're doing that because you can essentially melt the fibers a little bit too much. But I typically use wet blocking. I've only done steam blocking a couple of times. I personally just prefer wet blocking because I feel like the changes are a little bit more drastic and I have a little bit more control over how I manipulate my fabric. But as long as you're blocking, I'm happy. So if you prefer steam blocking, that's totally up to you. You know, do what you want. But in this video, I'll be mostly covering wet blocking. So that's kind of a broad overview of how you would go about blocking something. But now I want to talk to you about why you should be blocking your pieces. Now, I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard people saying that crochet is too stiff, too sturdy, has a lot of structure, kind of terms like this. And I'm here to tell you that yes, crochet can be all of those things, but it can also have a lot of drape. I think crochet gets kind of a bad rap when it's compared to knitting, especially because knitting does drape really nicely, especially in stockinette stitch. But crochet can also have that drape. I think blocking is just not as commonly done amongst crocheters than it is knitters. So I'm here to tell you basically that crochet can drape just as nicely as knitting. You just need to be blocking your pieces. So for me, that is kind of the biggest reason why you should be blocking, is to give your crochet pieces, your crocheted fabric, more of a drape and basically make it more like real clothing. I don't really enjoy wearing stiff pieces. Now, if you're making a bag or a hat, then I would say, yeah, go for it. Maybe don't block that piece if you want to keep the stiffness of your piece. But if you're making a sweater, a top, pants, a skirt, a dress, then I highly recommend blocking your finished crochet pieces because, again, you're going to get a lot more drape on that piece once you block it. So that is, again, reason number one. And there's many reasons. I'm just going to cover a few. Reason number two is that you can manipulate your fabric into whatever shape you want. So I'm going to touch lightly on another contentious topic, which are gauge swatches. And I'll have another video on that hopefully out in a couple of weeks. But if you are following a pattern and you've made a gauge swatch and you're not able to match it exactly, let's say you're 1 or 2 stitches off, what you can and should do is block your gauge swatch. And when you block your gauge swatch, you can manipulate that swatch so that it matches your pattern's gauge. So by doing this, you don't really even need to match the gauge exactly when you're crocheting. You just need to be able to check that your gauge swatch fabric can match the gauge in the pattern. So I think this is like a huge reason why you should be blocking your pieces that people don't really seem to talk about, because I know matching gauge is a huge issue with crochet patterns. But you can literally block your piece to match the gauge in the pattern. As long as you're relatively close to the gauge in the pattern, you can almost always block it to the actual gauge. And in general, you should be blocking your gauge swatches if you're going to block your final piece, which I highly recommend that you do. I actually just blocked 2 gauge swatches, so here they are. I'm planning my summer designs, and so I received new yarn, tried out the stitches, and right now I am currently blocking my gauge swatches because I'm going to block my final pieces, and these blocked gauge swatches are going to tell me how my fabric is going to react to being blocked. So this is super important. You want to make sure that you are blocking your gauge swatches, and it kind of is a plus because you can not exactly match gauge as you're crocheting. Just make sure that you can manipulate your fabric to match the gauge once your fabric is blocked. So that's like a huge reason that, again, that I don't hear that many people talking about, but it's a huge plus. Kind of going off of that, you can actually use less yarn than you may need to otherwise if you're not blocking your pieces. So you may have seen kind of very drastic before and after blocking videos on Instagram. I know I have. They're so satisfying to watch. But you probably noticed that the piece grows in size. And again, this is a huge benefit because you don't need to buy or use as much yarn as you would otherwise. So if you're not blocking your piece and you wanted to stretch to, I don't know, 20 inches or that many centimeters, I don't know how many centimeters 20 inches is, but let's say you want your piece to stretch that much. If you're not blocking your piece, you're gonna just crochet till that piece is as long as you want it. However, if you are blocking your piece, you can kind of save on like an inch or two and then stretch it out when you are blocking and pin it in place to dry at that desired length, shape, size, whatever. So again, blocking actually helps you use less yarn than you otherwise might, which again is another huge plus. Like I promise you, there's only benefits to blocking your pieces. Another reason why you would want to block is because of your fabric characteristics. So let's say you're working on a piece that has eyelets like this one, or is ribbed, or has cables, you know, is kind of textured in some way. Blocking really helps your fabric relax and open up a bit. So for example, from the cardigan that I'm wearing right now, these eyelets were much smaller before I blocked my piece, and after blocking they've really opened up and are a little bit larger. If you're working something with ribbing, you may notice that your ribbing is really, really tight, but then once you block it, it relaxes. It's a little bit more elastic. If you're making cables, you might notice that the cables pucker up or kind of cinch together before you block, and then after blocking the fabric relaxes and your work will sit nice and flat. So that's another plus to blocking your finished pieces. And kind of the last reason I can think of is that it really evens out your tension. So especially if you're a beginner crocheter or knitter, your tension probably won't be as even as it will be later on once you've had much more practice, but blocking really does help kind of smooth out any imperfections and make your fabric look a little bit more seamless. I know that sounds like, how would it do that? I don't really know exactly how, but I think just the fabric relaxing and laying flat to dry for many hours really does help in kind of smoothing out the finished look. I am a knitter, but I'm not as proficient in knitting as I am in crochet, and I definitely notice I have like a few more tension issues when I am knitting, and once I block my piece, it's almost like not noticeable at all. Everything looks super uniform. So I also always block my finished knits as well as my finished crochet pieces. So those are just some of the reasons why you want to be blocking. Hopefully I've convinced you that it is a step that you really should not be skipped. And I'm also here to tell you it's not as scary as you think. My biggest recommendation is to block a little swatch so that you see how your fabric will react, because different fabrics will react to varying degrees. For example, plant-based fabrics tend not to grow as much once you wet block them as much as kind of animal-based fibers. So kind of a fabric that is super well known for growing a lot is superwash merino wool. That one tends to grow a lot when you block it. So definitely make a swatch of your fabric in the stitch that you're going to use in your project, and block that so that you see how your fabric will react, so that you don't block your finished piece and end up ruining it later on. Actually, that's how I learned how to block. I blocked a cardigan that was basically done. I didn't block a swatch, and then it became humongous. So take my advice, please listen to me and make a swatch and block that first so that you don't block your finished piece and then end up not liking how it turned out. I promise you I'm trying to save you from a headache later on. So please, please, please make a swatch and block that. Alright, so now without further ado, I think I've been talking for long enough as always, but now I'm actually going to show you the process of wet blocking this cardigan. Alright, so I'm starting off by heating up some water in my sink. I want to make sure that it's kind of lukewarm, not too hot, not too cold, and I'm just heating it up, feeling it with my hand until I'm happy with the temperature. Once I am happy with the temperature of the water, I'm going to go ahead and fill my tub here. So I'm just putting it in the sink because it's easier to do that. And now here you can see me putting in detergent. I'm just going to put a little splash, and you really don't need very much. Notice I'm being very careful. You can also use kind of specific wool detergent if you're using wool, but I find that regular clothing detergent works just fine. So here I'm just going to fill the tub until I feel like it's enough water for my piece. So here the tub is a little bit more full, and now I'm taking my finished cardigan here and I'm just dunking it in the water. So I want to make sure that it is fully and completely submerged in the water. So here I'm just using my hands to gently press the cardigan into the tub, and I didn't think it was enough water, so I added a little bit more, again trying to keep the temperature kind of in that lukewarm medium temperature range, and again just pressing with my hands gently. Now, once I feel like there's enough water that the cardigan is fully submerged, I'm just squeezing it with my hands gently. The key word here is gently. I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes. Anything between 15 to 25 minutes should be more than enough. So after the 25 minutes are up, it's time to try and remove as much water from our blocking piece as we can. So here I am just dumping the water that's in the tub before squeezing out my cardigan, and I am just really trying to remove as much water as possible so that my cardigan is drying for less time. So here I'm using my hands to gently squeeze water, then I'm dumping it out and just repeating this process of gently squeezing my cardigan in this tub and then pouring the water out. I'm a little bit hesitant at first to kind of carry my piece out of the tub since it is quite heavy, since it's absorbed so much water. So I personally first like to try and squeeze as much water as I can while my piece is still in the tub, then dump it as I'm doing here, and just alternate doing that until I've removed as much water as I am comfortable with before actually starting to lift my piece out of the tub. So for this, I actually enlisted my boyfriend's help here because he has a much stronger grip strength than I do, and he knows to be gentle and not lift the whole piece out of the tub. So just continue squeezing the water out of your piece as gently as you can until you feel like you've removed as much water as possible. So once you're done squeezing the water out of your item, you're ready to move on to your blocking mats. So here you can see me setting up my blocking mats. You don't actually need blocking mats specifically. You can use a towel, a yoga mat. I even saw someone use cardboard ones. Whatever you have on hand should work, but preferably blocking mats would be the ideal here. Once my mats are all set up, I am extending a towel here. It's just a separate towel that I have. I actually thrifted mine because I have had dye kind of stain other towels before, so use a towel that you're not particularly attached to. And here you can see me laying my cardigan out nice and flat, and I am just rolling it up in the towel here. So this is another way to remove even more water further from just squeezing it with your bare hands. So here I am really pressing down on this towel. I even put my full weight on it here, as you can see. And again, the idea is just to remove even more water so that our piece doesn't take so long to dry. You can even do this up to 2 times if you have yet another towel to spare. So once I have removed as much water as I am physically able to, I'm ready to pin my cardigan into place. So here you can see me laying it flat, stretching it, and using a tape measure to measure all dimensions of my cardigan. I want to make sure that I'm pinning my piece in place to those set dimensions because that's how the fabric is going to dry and relax and really sit into place with those desired dimensions. So really take your time with this step. I don't recommend skipping the pinning step. I've seen many people kind of just lay their garments flat to dry. If you do that, you kind of risk your work shrinking back to its original size. So again, really take your time, pin your piece in place so that it dries and sets to your desired dimensions. You can even use the gauge in the pattern to figure out very specific stitch and row counts to tell you what dimensions your piece needs to be in. So take your time with this step. Alright, so this is what my cardigan looks like when it's fully pinned. So now all that's left to do is wait for it to fully dry. It takes a little bit of time, maybe 1 or 2 days, but it's definitely worth it. So make sure that your piece fully dries. Here, all that I would have left to do is add the buttons, weave in any remaining ends, and sew my label. But that is essentially it for the blocking process. Now it's just patience to let it dry. Alright, so that is all I have for you today. Hopefully this video was informational and kind of made blocking seem less intimidating for those of you who might have been intimidated by the process, or if you already knew how it was done but you didn't want to do it. Hopefully I've convinced you as to why you should be blocking your finished pieces, and it will take your pieces to the next level and hopefully make them more wearable so that you get more use out of them, because that is the ultimate goal, is to wear the pieces that you make. Alright, I just want to thank you so much for watching to the end. Thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and happy crocheting / knitting as always. Bye!